Welcome to Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth, the podcast where we explore the beautiful, messy and transformative magic that happens when we dare to go within. I'm your host, Robin Harris, and in each episode we'll dive into real, honest stories from people who've faced their fears, embraced their vulnerabilities and discovered unexpected growth in their personal lives, careers, or businesses. This is a space for deep listening, open hearts, and soul-nourishing conversations. Because when we meet ourselves in our rawest moments, that's often where our greatest wisdom starts. Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth. And today I have another fabulous guest with me. Welcome, Rich.
Hi there, how are you doing?
So, as usual, I shall start with an introduction and tell you a little bit about Rich. As the child of a British ex-serviceman and an exiled Eastern European from Prague in the midst of the Cold War, Richard had the right foundation to become an international spy. However, always keen to share the great secrets he learns, that career was never really a viable option. So instead, Richard spent 30 years being parachuted in to countless well-known international companies to rescue them from disaster, or to guarantee success of complex missions. Richard likes to get the most out of life. He's a former Team GB high and springboard diving athlete, a C-level career with many big names like HSBC, Adidas and Formula One, an author, speaker, scuba diver, pilot, skier, open water swimmer and keen social entrepreneur. He often says, if we only have one life, why not try to live three? Always gaining experiences and skills and some great stories along the way. So, Richard, it's wonderful to have you here, Rich.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So that was the what of Rich and all of the,
Yes.
well, maybe not all of, because I know you have a lot of strings to your bow, but that was a fair number of things that you've done, been involved with, are still engaged in now. But what about the who of you? Can you just quickly give us who is Rich?
What a great question. Who am I? I think we're all the products of our experiences, aren't we? Yeah, that's what makes us. If you were to clone somebody, take a genetic clone of somebody, you might be identical in DNA and body, but it's the experiences that make us who we are. It's everything that we've seen, we've done, we've experienced, good and bad, the absolute sort of amazing of things that we do, as well as the traumatic things that we don't necessarily wish we'd ever done. But it's all of those things that make us who we are. And who am I? I'm just that unique combination of those experiences, just like everybody else is, really.
What makes your story relatable for others?
As a child, I used to always think that I saw myself almost like an alien living on this planet rather than a human among everybody else. I don't mean that in some sort of out there kind of way. I just meant that my life was very isolated from the vast majority of the population. And so I kind of saw the world almost from the outside rather than from the inside. And I was always determined to try to understand how other people thought because I felt like I wasn't one of them. I was, you know, uh, didn't really have any friends as a child because my parents didn't really have any friends and I didn't really sort of socialize and didn't go to nursery, didn't do all of those sort of things. I only went to school for a small bit, and I left school and I was taught at home and again isolated from the world. And I don't mean that in a bad way because I loved actually, the fact that I was taught at home and things I experienced then and things I got to do. But it meant that our social interactions just weren't there. But I spent all my time trying to actually learn how other people thought. And I was always fascinated by other people in the world, if you like, and tried to find ways to have a connection so that when I did meet other people, I could actually connect with them. And so it's always been so important for me to find different ways to relate to other people and for them to relate to the bits of me that they could necessarily not even understand, but well, things that they could relate to themselves.
And I think there are a lot of people who have that sense of being disconnected or being on the outside. So I'm sure there are a lot of people who relate to that experience as well.
Mm.
And then,
It's been a big part. I was going to say like that sort of relation from the outside throughout lots of different parts of my life. I've actually tried to reinvent myself, and then you experience different people in different ways, and you reinvent yourself again. And that's all to do with how do you relate to people better? How do you relate to people better? But that isolated perspective that you might have sort of seen from my early days. As I said, I don't mean that in a negative way. It was a fantastic experience in so many ways, but it meant that I was always on the outside looking in. And then later on in life, like lots of personal sort of things that have actually happened to me. Again, it's very much on the outside looking in. And it's given me a very interesting perspective on so much. And it's also allowed me to see things that if I was on the inside, I wouldn't have been able to see.
is very much about perspective and perception. So I love that you've chosen that perspective because it could be so easy to focus on the things that didn't support or didn't feel so
Mm.
good. But that, even just that example, that there were a lot of positives, and it's not to say that there weren't
Mhm.
negatives, but the positives have assisted in lots of different ways. And who do
Yes.
you feel will gain the most from listening to this conversation?
I suppose it depends exactly which track we go down in our conversation as to who will get the most out um, of it, whether it's through entertainment or whatever they may get out of it, who knows. But I guess it depends upon exactly which direction we're really going to go in. But I would say that lots of people have always said to me that they've found my life fascinating. And I've always been determined to experience so much any chance to have an experience, I would always go for it. I would always do what I could to get that sort of experience. I didn't have the money to be able to pay for luxurious type experiences, but I did always look for how I could actually experience something, how I could tag along with something, how I could figure it out for myself to get that experience. And it's meant that I've actually got so much sort of varied ways of doing things and know how things work. So sometimes I've actually, to get the experience, I've had to learn how something works in order to be able to figure out how to get the experience. And so that sort of like insight into things has actually been quite interesting and educational. And I think that some listeners may well see that and go, oh, that's interesting how that person's actually got involved in that or did that, or how they see that from such a different angle to, well, sometimes everybody else.
Which is fantastic, isn't it? That we all do come from different perspectives. I think yours is probably so varied and wide ranging that you
Mhm.
have so much to share, but that everybody does bring that different perspective. And so everybody is fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. There's that expression, isn't there? To understand somebody well, you've got to walk a mile in their shoes. And as somebody else I know has sort of come back and said, somebody by the name of Gareth, who I'm sure that you know, he sort of said to me, one of the great things about taking walking a mile in somebody else's shoes is that it gives you two real advantages. Firstly, you've got their shoes, and secondly, they're a mile away. But anyway,
If their shoes don't fit, that could be quite uncomfortable.
it could be. You're right. It could.
And what do you hope people will take away from this conversation?
That there's more to life. There, every day that we're breathing is another day to experience something new. It's another chance to try something new, to find new opportunities, because quite frankly, the world is so ridiculously full of opportunities everywhere we look, everywhere we go, and just being able to see them is a wonderful thing because it just shows you how many doors are open and how many ways and different choices we can make. One of the interesting, we've had this conversation a long time ago, but one of the interesting things that I quite commonly teach through the online business school is a question of what's the opposite of fear? The word fear, yeah. If I said to you, what's a diametric opposite of fear? And everybody comes up with different answers. The instant answer that most people come up with, like they'll kind of go, oh, it's this or it's that. Yeah. And normally I'll just to be slightly problematic, I'll kind of go, nope, you're wrong. Yeah. And we'll keep on going down and they'll kind of go, but the opposite of fear to me is this. It means that. And it's interesting that a word that we all know, fear, how can we not know what the other opposite is? How do we struggle with that? And when I suggest to them what I think the opposite should be, yeah, so tell me if you want me to go into that now or later or whenever, it's entirely up to you. But when I sort of go into that, they're going to go, I never thought of it that way. And one of the great things I think about hearing other conversations, hearing wonderful podcasts, hearing from random people that you'd never have crossed paths with otherwise, is exactly that. Yeah, I would have never thought of it that way. And anything which makes us think differently, I think is a wonderful experience to make us bigger and better people. And I always say, and I've said this on countless different podcasts and countless different places and different talks, you name it, where I'll say that what I consider to be the definition of a good life is giving more to, sort of a life where you've given more than you've ever taken. And, so you can start off with gazillions in the bank, but if you start off with only half as much, you've taken a lot. If you actually start off and doubling it, then great. Yep, on a financial sense, but it's in so many senses. The more we can give, the more we can contribute to the world, then the more that the world has actually been impacted by our very existence. And who doesn't recognize it as being a positive thing that our existence has actually done something to actually, as little as it might be, to enhance the world, even by the smallest amount?
Absolutely. And it's interesting just listening to all that you've said so far. You're obviously somebody who has a positive outlook on life, and you choose to follow those opportunities, as you talked about before, rather than looking at maybe things that have not gone so well, and that sense of a door closing. So once the door closes, it seems that you're the kind of personality who would then look for the window opening.
Yeah,
However, having said that, I know that you have had some considerable challenges,
yeah.
hurdles, blocks to your roadblocks on your journey. And when you look back now, what do you think, or what would you say is the deepest vulnerability that you've experienced? And what did you ultimately have to face within yourself before you were able to look away from that closed door and see instead the open window?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a lot of things that sort of um, resonate from that. Um, I would say that, firstly, I don't see myself as being a glass half full kind of person. There was a cartoonist who was called Gary Larson, who was absolutely brilliant at drawing these wonderful little cartoons in the sort of late 80s or the 80s into the 90s, which were just very amusing, and they made perfect birthday cards and great cards. And sort of like there was one of them which was they sort of like the four personality types. One was this glass is half empty. This glass is half full. Then it was this glass is half full. No, half empty. Half full. No, half empty. And there's another which was I ordered a cheeseburger. Yep. And I just loved that because that was very much, people say, which one are you? And I think it's all about context. On some days, you might be half full, some days you might be half empty. But my answer to that is always that I'm not half full or half empty. I just know that there's always room for more. And that's a reflection very much of me trying to get the most out of life. And I've always, always, always tried to get the most out of life. That's not always been in a half full or a half empty kind of perspective. That's just been a driver that I've always gone along with. And it has led me to some wonderful opportunities, and it's also led me into some horrible, horrible dark holes. I went through a ridiculously traumatic um, period. I married a narcissistic abuser. I was in a horribly abusive marriage to somebody who, quite frankly, took all of my self-esteem and trampled it to death. I was made to choose between seeing my children or having contact with my parents. I was made to choose between this or that constantly. It was do this or you can't see children. All of these constant narcissistic abusive threats, which were actually ended up being honored anyway. Um, but it's that kind of do this or else, do that or else. And you're kind of going, well, what other choice have I got? What am I going to do? And as a result, you kind of go, well, you can't look at that and kind of go, oh, it's a happy day. I've got these wonderful opportunities when you kind of worried about ever seeing your children again, or you worried about losing everything you've got there, or you've actually been threatened that you're actually not going to be breathing the next day. And so, how do you deal with all of this? Yeah, you can't just be happy and chirpy and jolly. Like life isn't one great big Valium to be swallowed. It's the good and the bad. And when you are in that situation, you feel like you're actually trapped in quicksand. And when you're trapped in quicksand, what do? You're kind of going, oh, there's somebody walking past. Help, help. And all they're kind of doing is looking at you, kind of going, ooh, there's a noisy nutter screaming from the middle of that pond over there. Yep. They don't see that you're actually there screaming desperately for help, screaming desperately to be recognized, kind of going, like, somebody, like, this is a situation I'm in, and I don't know how to get out of it. Yeah. And when you're in that sort of situation, some people will kind of go, oh my gosh, I'd love to be able to help you, but I don't know how. Other people go, yep, I understand where you're at. You're in the middle of quicksand. Yep, there you go. I've helped you identify that. Thanks very much. Yep. And how do you help somebody who's treading water in, like treading quicksand, sinking, knowing that they're going to go under any moment? Yeah. And when you're in that situation, trust me, it's not a happy, chirpy moment by any means. When you've found out in the 1 week, for example, in my life, my ex-wife relocated or got permission to relocate my children 350 miles away, despite having a history of breaching every single contact order. In addition to that, she also was awarded the vast majority of the equity, everything I'd ever worked for, leaving me going from a very healthy positive bank account to a very, very unhealthy negative one, losing absolutely everything. In the same week I was being screened for testicular cancer, and in the same week my best friend died. When that all happens to you, that's you being thrown into the quicksand. You're kind of going, what am I supposed to do now? Somebody help me. First of all, you're actually in shock, kind of going, what do you do now? Then eventually it's like, somebody help me. And everybody's kind of going, oh my God, stay away, you'll get dragged in. And then eventually you actually learn how to breathe. You learn how to just about sort of maintain your sanity. But you know, everybody's got their own thresholds, everybody's got their own limits. And for me, I ended up having virtually having a nervous breakdown as a consequence. Kind of going, well, I've not got my kids who I absolutely worshipped and adored and did absolutely every single thing for. And anybody that's ever knew me with my kids knew that I lived for them in every way possible. Suddenly having them ripped out of my life, suddenly having that where you're not even playing for contact with your children. You're basically then fighting with your children because they're kind of going, no, I'm not going to come down to you. I'm not going to be told by any court what to do. I'm not, and you're kind of going, suddenly you're in this competition with people you don't ever want to be in competition with. Yeah. And you're kind of going, I don't want a competition anyway. Yeah. And it's just horrible. And what do? You either let life drown you or you actually figure out some way around it. And for me, it took over 10 years to get through that. Yeah. And even still, you're left with major scars because, you're treading water and standing on razor blades and eggshells and add whatever you want to into that metaphor, but you are getting really, really wounded during that time. But somebody once introduced me, and I think they probably did it because of the metaphoric reference. They introduced me to this type of Japanese pottery, where they would deliberately smash this pottery and it was up to the artists to actually to take the pieces and put them together. But you can never fix the broken pottery. But what you can do is create something that's better than it ever was before. And to me, that was the challenge that I thought I've got two choices here. I can either sink and be a victim or I can actually be self-sufficient and actually stronger, become stronger than I was before. Yeah, of course, I'm very broken and scarred because of everybody would be. But my challenge that I sort of set was to, in as many ways as possible, to become stronger than I ever was and to become far more than the sum of all of those parts.
Oh, and I know I never remember the name of that kind of pottery, but I
Yeah,
I don't know if you do, but it's where they put it together and they put gold in, don't they? In
they do. Yeah,
the cracks, so that they're actually highlighting. And there's a friend of mine was talking about, and I'm not sure that this is the same, but again, it's a Japanese philosophy, and I can't remember. It was short two words, and I can't remember them properly.
mm,
But it's that Japanese philosophy of where there's a flaw, we will actually make something of that flaw.
yeah,
And also, that's a separate thing from the broken and mending and making it more beautiful, and
hmm,
actually drawing attention to where it broke. And there's a
yeah,
lovely saying of where those cracks are, where our scars are, that's how the light gets in.
mm,
Because often when we've had a situation that has left us feeling broken, I don't actually think we're broken, but we might feel broken. And yet we can come out of it feeling I'm stronger now because of that. It was
hmm.
the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I learned and I grew and I changed and I developed and I was able to embody even more of myself because of that
Hmm.
experience.
Mm. I agree with you 99% of that. I think that the only thing is that sort of saying that that it was almost a good thing that happened and it never ever was. You know what I
No.
mean? It's like it's that like I wish that I'd never been through it, and for anybody else who's been through anything even remotely similar, like it's not fair. The life's not fair, the world's not fair, nothing is fair. Fair doesn't even really exist. Um, but it's just sort of yeah, they say what doesn't kill you makes you grow stronger. Well, it doesn't because slow acting poisons just gradually kill you. But like I'm always sort of determined to try to um make the most of even the worst situation. And you're never glad it's happened because it's just wrong. But if you don't um make make something of it, make yourself into a better person rather than make yourself more twisted from it or more bitter or more anything else. If you don't make it help you make you to a better person, then not only is the past damaged, but also then it damages the future. And we may not be broken in that sense, and I agree that we're not broken until we don't exist anymore, if you like. Yep. We're not broken then, but we're certainly not going down the path that we would ever want to go down. And I don't wish those experiences on anybody. Yes, it's responsible for building resilience and tolerance and so much more, but certainly it's a lesson that yeah, I always hope that nobody ever has to learn.
Yes, and I didn't ever mean that.
I know,
Yeah,
I know.
but just to state, I wouldn't ever mean that that was something I would wish for.
Mm,
I would choose to go through it again, or I would choose for somebody I know to have a similar experience so that they could obviously
yeah,
come out a different person.
yeah, mm,
But it's just that when these things happen, they don't have to be the end and they don't
no,
have to shape us in a certain way. We can choose our path through it, even though we may be feeling for a lot of that time that we're sinking. Because it does take
Mm,
time. We are in shock. It does take time to learn, how do I even just manage to stay afloat? Just keep
yeah.
my nose, even if I can't keep my mouth, maybe just keep my nose above the water so that I can breathe for a while until I
Hmm.
know, right, that's my next step. Because it
Hmm.
does take time and we do need to adjust to the new situation and
And
to.
it does take external influence as well. I always remember there was a really good friend of mine that I used to work with like years and years and years ago. Um, like that we got really, really well at work and it was great. And I didn't see him for years, but I remember before I sort of left that place of work, we always got on really, really well and we talked very openly about lots of things. And I remember him saying to me, like what's happening to you is not right. And there's me, repeating the line that I'd been told of, well, you're the common denominator of all your problems. Well, everybody's a common denominator of all their problems. Everybody's a common denominator of all the wonderful things that happen to them. Yep. Because that's our string of our timeline, our life. Yep. But when you're actually told, oh, well, you're the common denominator of all your problems, you sort of think, oh, well, maybe I need to change. And that's what happened to me was that I'd taken that deliberate manipulative statement and sort of like thought, well, it must be my fault. And taking on responsibility and taking responsibility so seriously, I was like, oh, well, that needs to change. But he'd said to me, this friend Dan had said to me, what's happening to you is really not right. Yeah. And that resonated in my head. That went around my head so many times over the years. And um, I sort of thought, well, somebody else said it wasn't right, and he was right. And as it started to unfold, it was like, yeah. And I suddenly sort of didn't feel so alone because before that I was always alone because, it was always, well, you're not allowed to speak to these people or else. Cut these people out of your life or else. Do that or else. Do that or else. I didn't see my friends that I went to college with in Blackwood for years. I wasn't allowed to speak, with my cousins and all of these people were cut out of my life. Yeah. And so those external influences of people saying to you, actually, that's not right, or here's another perspective, or actually, you know what, doesn't matter what's right or wrong. I've got your back. You've always got me here. That was the one thing that was constantly being eroded and was missing. But I always remember that that person had said that. And then years later, we actually met up, and I sort of said to him, I just sort of basically sort of said to him, so I wanted to say, before I say anything else, I wanted to say, thank you. And he's like, what for? And I went, you said to me that actually what I was going through was not right. Yeah. And that was probably one of the only things that made me stop and think, actually, it's not just me. Because everything else I was doing was I was blaming myself because it was easy to blame yourself because, well, it's being self-deprecative. You can't, it's an easy target to blame yourself. And it just sort of like Dan's influence allowed me to actually reflect on that and then afterwards, it was like it was what you sort of said that you were one of the only people that actually stopped and rather than just brushed it off or kind of like I don't want to get involved or anything else, you were like genuinely that isn't right. And it really changed how I was able to even deal with the quicksand because I realized that there was someone else who was sort of telling me it wasn't all my fault. It wasn't just me. Almost the world would be better off without me. I mean, I've never been suicidal in my life and I never ever would be because there's so much we can do with our lives. There's so many opportunities, and I'd much rather join the French Foreign Legion and well, learn French and go and do something, even no matter how useful it is, even at my own detriment, if you like. It'd be a waste of my life and my organs to not actually try to help other people and do other things, even if it's just to contribute to the world with my existence doing something. Do you get where I'm coming from? And so I've always sort of like, no, I'm going to make use of this lucky opportunity that I've got to actually be alive, to actually give it the justice that it deserves, to do something with this life. And so, with that combined with what Dan said, that's two of the things that really kept me afloat. And then they would meet the odd person who kind of go, "Oh God, I hate what you're going through," or "I've seen this," or "I overheard that," and it was like, "Oh my gosh!" And that sort of started to make me sort of realize that actually I wasn't alone, and none of us are ever alone. no matter how well someone else tries to isolate us, no matter how well somebody else alienates all of the actual connections with others in the outside world, friends, family, random strangers on buses, doesn't matter. It's but when you actually have any connections with people and other people kind of go, I hear you. I recognize that. I see you. I understand you. I'll listen to you. It makes you feel recognized that you're actually in the quicksand, which makes each stroke feel a lot lighter than when you're doing it alone.
Absolutely. And Brene Brown talks about that because she says that when we're in that place of vulnerability and somebody else says, yes, me too, or I hear you, and you know that they really do. So they've really listened, they've really heard you, because you know the difference, don't you,
Hmm.
between I
Yeah.
hear you, gosh, yes, I can see what you're going through. And like your friend said, but that isn't right.
Mm.
Versus, oh, yeah, yeah, I hear you. But guess what happened to me? It's a
Yeah.
very different energy. And I think, like you said, it's so easy in some ways for us to feel that isolated and for people
Mm.
around us to do that isolating, where you get
Mm.
into such a small world that you think, because they're the only voice kind of that you're hearing. And even in your
Yeah.
own head, it's
Yes.
that voice that has become so deeply internalized that because it's trying to keep you safe, the inner voice. The outer voice is going, you can't do this because you won't see your children. You can't do this because I'll,
Mm.
I'll end your life. Or you can't do
Mm.
this because, it's not, I'm not going to let you talk to your family. Whatever it is, and to keep you safe, your inner voice goes, well, I have to do that because if I don't, I won't see my family, or I
Yeah.
won't be alive tomorrow morning. I won't wake up. I'll go to sleep and that's it. I'll be, killed in the middle of the night or whatever, or I'll lose all my money, or they'll badmouth me to all my friends and family who will reject me. All of those things that when your world is that small and that's the predominant voice, we internalize to keep us safe.
Yeah.
I mustn't do this, 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 and this, because then if I were to do that, then these are the outcomes. Because to feel safe, if that's what I'm being told, feeling safe is do what they say. But
Mm.
then to have another voice come in who hears you, who sees you, and who just accepts what you say, just
Mm.
takes it and says, but you know what's happening isn't right. So they're a voice anti the one that you've been hearing all that time that has been filling everything in your day. And they
Mm.
come in and disrupt that. It's that
Well, you
pattern
learn to
interrupt that's,
accept their voice. Exactly. You learn to
mm,
accept their voice because you can kind of go, well, if I do this, I know that they're going to say this. And you've become conditioned to, as you say, hear
yes,
their voice even when they're not saying it.
yeah.
So you know what the consequences are going to be if you do this or you do that. And so you're constantly afraid of the consequences, which comes back to what I was saying before about the diametric opposite of fear. Okay. And when I realized what I might be wrong. I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but when I realized what I still to this moment believe is the diametric opposite of fear, it was an absolute revelation for me, which sounds somewhat overly dramatic, but if I kind of explain what I think it actually is, I might kind of like, play with you a little bit first and sort of ask you what you think it is. But if you remember from previous bits, you might kind of go, "Oof, I already kind of know what you're going to say." But like if we sort of explore it, then I think it would be quite interesting for any listeners to sort of say whether they actually agree with it or don't agree with it. Put in comments in the chat. There we are. There's a throw in. But certainly, it's an opportunity to actually then sort of see whether they agree with it or just don't agree with it, or can enhance it, or can elaborate and make it even clearer, better, sharper. Because to me, the diametric opposite of fear is not what I thought it was years before.
So
What
what
do
would
you
you,
think it is?
for me, I've always looked at it in a kind of an energetic perspective and
Hmm.
the vibration of the different emotions and the fact that fear is right down at the bottom. When we're in fear or we're in despair, despair actually is the
Hmm.
furthest, it's absolutely the bottom because then we'll just give up and we if we're really in despair, we don't even take action. Fear is something that would mobilize us, hopefully, to take action unless we go into freeze.
Hmm.
But then the upper end would be things like joy and love. But I know that you're coming at this from a different perspective because we have talked about this before. So
Yeah.
putting aside the kind of energy and vibration and that side of things,
Yes.
what do you see as the opposite of fear? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of
Why you have that
of
perspective?
course, of course. So fear basically is that feeling, that emotional sensation, because you know that something is going to happen. You're worried about something happening. You've got this is you're afraid of this outcome. Okay, and what it is that you end up being locked in on this particular outcome. So I would say that the diametric opposite of fear is actually freedom of choice. If you've got no choice, that's what you've got the fear of. You've got the fear of a particular forced outcome. But if that outcome isn't forced and you've actually got this freedom of choice, you can actually choose any other outcome. You can examine any other outcome. You're actually looking at those things, going to go, well, there's an alternative to that. There's an alternative to that. And it's giving you that freedom of choice, which is not the outcome that you're forced to accept. And the problem is with a narcissistic abuser is they've narrowed down your options. They narrow down the choices that you can make. And as I've frequently sort of said, one choice is no choice. Two choices is a dilemma. Three choices when you start to get somewhere. And as you start to get more choices, you can end up in overwhelm. But if you've got more choices, isn't it best to have no choices rather than none at all? Especially if that none at all is a really, really horrible one. Yeah. And so for me, the direct opposite of fear is freedom of choice. And the minute I realized that actually that's what I've been forced to focus on, I've been forced to focus on the option, the choice I don't want. And instead, if I can go, well, what other choices are open to me? What else can I do? There's a point of almost despair where you're going, there are no choices. What else can I do? Yeah. But that's where, if you can actually work out any options, if you can see any other options, if you can kind of go, well, hold a second, what other options are they hiding that I don't know exist? Or how can I actually find or create another option? How can I get something else going that's going to allow me to escape? How can I get something else that's going to try to help me to get out of the situation and protect my daughters? And all of these things kind of go through you where you're kind of going, well, what can I do? Yep. And sometimes there may be no other option. And and that's when we can either accept it or feel the fear. But like that freedom of choice is about discovering what other options there are that are around. And once I actually started to look at what fear was, I realized when I was being oppressed by anybody in my life when they've sort of tried to narrow down my options. Oh no, you will do that. You're kind of going, actually, no, I won't because I've got a freedom of other things and I'll choose to do those things. If I choose to do that thing that you're suggesting, it's because it has to be my choice, not because I have no other choice. And that allowed me to gain more and more and more clarity. I couldn't do it when I was in my drowning in quicksand headspace. But looking at it now, I can see it and go, actually, the more I can try to focus on finding any other choices, the more it'll show me what level of freedom I do or don't have, and what ways I can or can't address a situation. And the more freedom we can create for ourselves, the better, which is why I believe and always have believed my entire life in transparency. Yeah, I'm quite an open book, as you can probably tell. Yeah, I always believe in transparency. Whereas an abuser believes in the opposite of transparency. Yep. They're there to try to narrow down your options, not let you see any other choices, not let you see any other options, not let you be yourself, not let you experience this, not let you do this, not let you. It's all about control. Whereas freedom of choice is all about the opposite of fear. It's all about actually having life on own terms.
And being empowered. And
Yes.
when you were talking about you couldn't do that from that drowning space,
Mm.
I think that happens because we get just so frozen. I can't
Yeah.
think. I can't see anything else apart from this thing that you have put right in front of my face.
Hmm.
You are wagging that finger in my face. Your voice, everything is right there, and I
Yeah.
can't see around it.
Yeah.
But then when we find that, yes, I have a brain over there myself.
Yes. I always sort of say that humans, mammals, all mammals, have got two brains. Okay, we've got the primitive fight and flight brain, which is where we're pressed into in an abusive
Yes.
situation. It's where we're pressed into because we're going to go and panic, panic, panic. That's all happening in this second brain that's underneath, not this one that's on top. It's about this one here. Yeah, and this one on top, this is the bigger one, the cleverer one, the one that makes us into the mammals that we are. That's our decision-making center. That's our experience simulator. This is where we can think up those other choices. If we're trapped in this brain, in the quicksand, panicking, we don't get anywhere. We've got to be able to engage this one. But you can't sort of say, you know what? Use your second brain, use your neocortex, because you're going, I can't, I'm panicking. Yep. I remember years ago, like when I was sort of, back in my piloting days, I read Pilot Magazine, one of these sort of like the world publications that is very well known in the community, and there was a definition that I saw in that of pilot error. Pilot error is a something that a board of specialists takes weeks, months, or years to figure out to know what a pilot should have done in a fraction of a second. And so, in that fraction of a second, that's when this primitive brain is actually having to do the hard work. And then, actually thinking about it, when you've got time to think about it, you can engage this thing and get all of the answers so you can actually think of what you really should have done. And hindsight is a wonderful thing. And that's where the hindsight is. Yeah, but when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the quicksand, when you're drowning, you are in panic mode. You are in fight, flight, freeze, and flop mode. You are in the mode of what do I do? And the blood flow, everything is focused on react now rather than, why don't you reflect on that for a while while I'm drowning? No. Yep. And it's how do you get somebody out of that panic, I'm drowning help into the, oh, hold on a second. If I actually, instead of shouting help, if I say, throw me that twig, you've got something to grab onto. And it's what's the alternatives? And it's trying to figure out what those alternatives are, what somebody else can do to help you. Yeah, because when you're actually stuck there and you're kind of going, help, all they're doing is kind of going, ooh, I don't want to get dragged into that. Yep. And you can't blame them. Yep. When at scuba diving, one of the first things, if you've got somebody who panics underwater, what's the best thing to do? Swim away from them. Why? Because if they grab you, they're more likely to drown you. Whereas if you wait for them to either stop panicking or pass out, you are in a position when you can actually then swim in and help them. You can't help them if you end up dying yourself. And so it's working out which part of the brain is actually being forced to be used and how you actually can get around that. And also there's times when you can't get around it and just have to accept it. And then you have to sort of think about what you can do when you're in a position to do something about it.
Absolutely. And that's why safety is so important, because when we're not feeling safe, we're in that primitive panic, fight, flight brain. We're in sympathetic mode. We're just,
Hmm.
do something now, get me out of this
Yeah.
situation. But
Yeah.
when we can bring that more into the parasympathetic and start to use all our brains together
Yeah.
in balance and harmony, the heart brain and the gut brain as well,
Yeah.
what wisdom does my body have to share with me
Hmm.
that can help me with my breathing or with my coming down out of that panic mode? But then, yes, taking that step back and just going, okay, I thought you were right in my face and that was my only option. But maybe there is something else that I haven't been able to look at because you've been so in
Hmm.
my face, or this thing has
Hmm.
been so prominent. That's the only thing I can see. But if I can take a step back and I can realize, oh gosh, I have at least two options, if not more. And yes, I love that you say it's that freedom of choice. It's that freedom. It's that
Mm.
spaciousness that opens up within and around us when we suddenly realize, oh, I get to choose. Even if
Yeah,
I choose the thing that I
you
was
still want.
afraid of, if I've chosen it, and knowing that
Yeah,
that choice does not commit me to that thing forever. I can choose, if I feel I only have the one choice or two choices and I don't like either of them, I can take a step into one choice and then I can make another one. Because maybe
yeah,
once I've moved, I've taken action, I begin to, I have a handle on what's going on here. And then I can reflect and choose another path from there because maybe
yeah,
once I'm there, oh, I see it differently. And actually, at this point, I can now see five options. And one
yeah,
of them looks a little bit better.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And no, completely. And that realization for me, which I could only realize when I was in the right headspace,
Yeah.
was certainly something that I've um, helped other people with. I started a charitable organization helping people who've been victimized by narcissistic manipulators. And while I've been running that, I have met lots of different people who have been put into that no choice, no win situation, choose between bad or worse. And so, where you think you've got a choice and actually you don't want either choice, and helped people to actually either face the hard choices with confidence, knowing actually it might be painful to begin with, but actually there's light at the other side. Yeah. Or to spot other opportunities, or to realize that they weren't alone and they weren't the only people that have actually been through it. And once they've got through it, what the options are that are available to them. And that's been a cathartic experience for me to be involved in that, to be working with all of these people and to be doing all of that because yeah, it might not have helped me, and it's certainly not helped my children, but it certainly was the opportunity to be able to help other people. And as I've sort of said, if I can leave the world in a better place, then to me, that's an instant win. And completely, slight sidetrack, completely fun fact. Did you know, because you talked about the head brain and the gut brain, did you know that if we've got one of these in our brains with like your 100 billion neurons, we've actually got other brain cells throughout our body, actual neuron brain cells throughout our body. And if you were to take all of those and put them together, they would have the same size brain as a dog. So there you go. So one man and his dog, that technically is each one of us. So there you go.
Fantastic. But I loved also what you said about when we're in that first headspace, that sinking headspace, we can't see. Quite often, we can only see the thing that we fear.
Yeah.
But also, what you were saying about the friend who said, but what's happening to you isn't right. Sometimes, often, it's really good to have somebody else there, friend, family, professional, whatever it is, somebody else who can hold that faith for us while we can't, who
Mm,
can help us to believe that there are other options, even if we can't see them just yet,
yeah.
can help us to know that what's happening right now isn't how it should be. In fact, it's the complete opposite. That this is not where you're supposed to be. It's not right. It's not fair. As you say, life isn't, and that's an expectation maybe that
Mm,
we've been led to believe, and maybe that keeps us stuck sometimes thinking, well, it's got to
mm.
turn around, it's got to turn around because what's been happening isn't fair. So it's bound to balance out in the end rather than just, no, maybe this is enough information to say, I'm getting out
Yeah. Well,
if we
for
can.
me, hope was one of the biggest killers for me, one of the biggest things that stopped me from getting out of quicksand, believe it or not, was hope. And that may be, people might kind of go, no, but hope's such a powerful thing. Yes, it is such a powerful thing in the right context, in the right environment. But for me, I was clinging on to something that could never be again. And without making it sort of almost morbid sounding, as I said, my daughters have always meant the world to me. And what I realized was that, that the children that I had that I loved, that, I couldn't get them back because they don't exist anymore. The ones that they have become, the people that they've become, the ones that have made the choice under the influences that they've had to go, they don't want to have me in their life. They're not going to be told to have me in their life. They're not going to, yeah, they're not the same people I know. Yep. And I was holding on the hope of actually getting my children back, but they just don't exist anymore. They've changed, whether you want to call that matured, evolved, whatever. Yep, help yourself to choose your words for that one. But certainly the people that they are today are not people that I actually even know because they've not inherited any of my values. They've not inherited any of my views on the world. They've not seen what's actually happened. They've been directed by other influences and haven't actually been interested in the facts, the other stuff that is there. And it's like, but they're going to go, well, who cares? Yeah. They've outgrown that. And it was hope that was holding on to me. Yeah. And it was the one day where it was after New Year and I tried to make contact with them. I tried to phone them, so just, and there was no contact. They didn't even pick up the phone, no contact, just completely dead. And I just went after all of what had been happening before with no contact. And it was almost like the last ditch try to make contact. And with no contact, it was like, well, what am I doing other than torturing myself? And that's all I was doing was torturing myself. Yep. They've made that choice, albeit for the wrong reasons, in my humble opinion. But they don't exist anymore. And the hope was what was holding on to me for the completely wrong reasons. The minute I actually went, actually, that they don't exist anymore. There's no point in that hope. It actually allowed me to stop and move on. And that's when I moved on from my almost fight and flight, drowning in quicksand phase of lying awake every single night, replaying every moment, kind of going, what could I have done differently? How could I have got a different outcome? How could I have escaped clearer? Could I have stayed in that marriage for longer, being trapped there and enduring this? And everything went through my head every single night after night after night. And sleep deprivation was ridiculous. Yep. And for years, this went on and on and on. And as I said, it's this glorified nervous breakdown, sort of trapped in this, I don't know what to do. I have no choice. Yep. Until I let go of that hope and kind of went, well, actually, I'm hoping for something that's never going to happen again. What are my other options? And I then sort of stopped and I went, I have to actually let them go. In essence, I saw my children that they had, in essence, died. Yeah. Not biologically, but certainly in every other way because they just don't exist anymore. And by that realization, as horrible as it is, it started to allow me to go through the grieving process, which I'd not allowed myself to even venture into. And sometimes we need to go through that grieving process to get to the point of acceptance where we can go, actually, God, I would have done anything to have had them in my life all the time. There's not a single day that goes by that I don't think of them. Yeah, like almost constantly. But it's that point where you go, actually, yeah, what I'm trying to get back, I can never get back. What I can do in the future is actually, you know what, maybe it's time I should actually look after myself and get myself out of the quicksand. Look after those who have actually helped to look after me while I was drowning, helped to support my friends, family, other people who have actually been there, to be back in contact with Dan to say thank you. All of those things because those people made sure that I didn't drown. Those people were there to help me with giving me that oxygen mask to keep me afloat. And without those people, who knows where I'd be today.
And on that note, and that note of gratitude for all those people out there who do hold space, who do hold belief in us, and who keep us going when times are really tough and we can't see a way out. I'd like to say thank you. Thank you so much for all that you've shared and for really thought-provoking conversation. I don't want to draw it to a close. We could carry on talking for many hours, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But just to draw it to an end, can you share with people who are listening and who are thinking, gosh, I need a bit of this. I need to talk to Rich. How can they contact you?
Okay. So I've got a few things that I've actually developed because obviously you can't, in this day and age, you can't be that one trick pony. You can't just do something. So I've got a lot of things that I do under the umbrella of smart inspiration. And that includes a whole load of different sort of like businesses, ventures, joint ventures, stuff that I'm actually doing, the charitable organization and so on. And so through smart inspiration, I can be then traced and found that way. And for people that actually are in a similar sort of situation, we have Respect for Me. So the website respectfor.me, which was deliberately set up in order to help to support people, as said, who've been victimized by narcissistic manipulators, right the way through to all of the other fun things that I do, from life-saving medical wearables that I created after Tom died, after sort of like then there's the various different things like Procubate that I do with businesses. There's lots of stuff that I do because it's great for me to be able to take the skills that I've actually got from the years of doing what I've done and actually share them in different ways. And uh, somebody once said to me, everything you've got has got one thing in common. And I went, well, what's that? And he went, well, peace of mind. You're always trying to help people to get peace of mind. Medical alert bracelets in order that they can have peace of mind that they've got their important information on them at all times for family members to know that they're always carrying that medical information, for example, or peace of mind with the 9-step process to guarantee business success that they know that they're going to succeed because, and every single one of the ventures, it's all about peace of mind. And so, even though they've got that as a thread, the ways that they're being represented, the ways that they're being presented to the world and delivered are heavily varied. And that's just it. Sometimes we can have one skill but we can do it in 1,000 different ways, which is also looping back to the start of why I sort of said that it is raining opportunities. There are opportunities falling all around us, absolutely everywhere. And it's just up to us to start to spot them and to get that freedom of choice, really.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Rich, for joining us today and for all that
You're
you've
welcome.
shared.
Thank
And
you.
I'm sure that there has been something in this conversation that has resonated with you because we've certainly traveled over quite a few different topics. So, as always, Rich's contact details will be in the show notes below, and do reach out. I'm sure there's something in there that you'd like to follow up on. And don't forget to hit subscribe and follow along. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Vulnerability, Introspection and Growth. I hope it's given you a moment to breathe, reflect, and perhaps even see your own story with a little more compassion. If you find this conversation meaningful, I'd love it if you'd share, subscribe, or leave a review. It helps others find their way here too. Until next time, take gentle care, and remember, the journey inwards is where the real growth begins.